Hi, I'm Francine. I'm your host of Table Talk, and today we're coming to you from BG's Cafe in downtown Oxnard, where we welcome everyone to join us on Mondays during our filming time. Today we're talking with my guest, Jack Seal. Jack is an attorney at the Bromund Law Group. His specialty is immigration, and we'll be talking about immigration today. And Jack, tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do, and how are you, immigration attorney?
Well, thank you for having me, Francine. BG's is a wonderful restaurant. We like to come down here quite a bit for breakfast. And, well, for myself, I'm an immigration attorney. I'm the chair of the immigration section of the Ventura County Bar. And as you know, I've been doing this for about 3 years, and it's pretty much all that I do.
So what got you into immigration law? Because you don't habla bien de español. So what got you into, immigration law?
I am learning Spanish. It certainly helps. It's a field of law where you can really help people and feel good about what you're doing every day. There's a lot of need out there for experienced and knowledgeable immigration attorneys, especially in our area. We have a lot of Hispanic population here in Oxnard and in Ventura County, and there's not a lot of attorneys who specialize, so there's a real need for it, and it's something that I've really enjoyed doing.
Now, what's the difference between you and an attorney I find on Craigslist or something?
Well, it's hard to say. Each individual attorney can. What I find is that a lot of attorneys who do immigration law dabble in immigration law. They do a little bit of it, and they do some other things. They do some family law, some tax law, or something else like that. What I do is I only do immigration law, so I make sure that I know everything that is important for each of my clients' cases.
Now, a lot of myths out there are that if I file my papers, they're going to deport me. They're going to show up at my door and deport me. How much truth is in that statement?
Well, very little, very little. The thing is that there's a couple different departments within the Homeland Security. There's Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and then there's USCIS, which is the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service. And they're somewhat separate. So when you file an application or a petition with immigration, you're filing it with USCIS. And that doesn't necessarily get over to the Department of Homeland Security. Now, that's not to say it never happens, because if you file something with immigration and with USCIS, and it comes back to you like a bad felony, maybe you distributing cocaine or something like that, then they might just refer it over to DHS. But for the average person who just wants to get their paperwork straightened out, there's really no risk in turning in that paperwork to USCIS.
Now, what are the benefits of having an attorney do my paperwork instead of me going to a friend or family member or going to someone who may have done it themselves before?
Well, there's a lot of risk in doing that. There's a lot of risk. One particular subject that comes up a lot is that people aren't too familiar with the ramifications of being here without permission in the first place. So, for example, if a couple meets and they get married and one wants to petition for the other, if, say, the husband has been here without permission for a while, say he came when he was 18 years old and he's 23 now, and now his wife is a citizen and wants to petition for him, she can do that and they'll be approved, but they'll still have to go to the consulate in the country that he's from and get in. Now, if they don't have an attorney or if they're not aware that they need a waiver for that, that spouse can be stuck in that other country for upwards of a year or potentially longer, because the penalty for being here without permission for a year or more is 10 years abroad. You have to stay outside the country for 10 years before they'll let you in, unless you get a waiver filed. So it's pretty important to at least have that information going in.
And what are some things people can do to protect themselves? Because you get people saying, well, I can help you with the paperwork, I'm an expert, I know what I'm doing. The next thing you know, you're in the back of a Homeland Security van.
That's something that is a really big problem, especially in this area. There's a lot of immigration consultants out there, or there's community-based organizations that will help people file their petitions with immigration. One problem that we've seen is notarios, because especially people from Mexico, my understanding is that in Mexico, if you're a notario, you also can give legal advice. And so for immigrants that come here from Mexico, they still believe that same thing holds true in the U.S. And so they'll go to a notary who will give them immigration advice, which is a lot of times more harmful than helpful. In fact, California recently passed a law making it illegal for notarios to give legal advice for immigrants.
Now, people who have had a bad experience, they went to one of those notarios or they went somewhere that it was wrong. Can they be saved in the sense that they had bad representation? Can they?
Sometimes they can. Sometimes there's not a whole lot we can do. But in general, we can find a way to back up and then find a better way to approach immigration. There are so many different ways to get your paperwork straightened out with immigration. It's hard to sum it up, but there are about 26 non-immigrant visas, and there's about 7 different ways that you can have someone petition for you for your immigration visa. There's a lot of tools at my disposal, but I need to have someone come in and talk to me about it before I can help them.
Now, what's the best advice for someone who comes to this country, they're working, they're doing everything they're supposed to do, and they get their papers, time to renew, and something goes wrong? How many times does problems happen during the renewal process?
Not that often. So if you have your green card or your lawful permanent resident card, you've got to renew that every 10 years. Now, normally when you send in the paperwork to renew it, they're going to also review your criminal background. Now, it might be that you've got a criminal conviction or more, and that might be something that becomes an issue. For that reason, if you have a criminal conviction, or if you think you might have a criminal conviction and you've got to send in paperwork to renew your green card, I think it's worth your time to go ahead and get an immigration consultation with an attorney. And again, it's something that most of us will do for free.
Now, what warrants a criminal activity? Now, I have a disease called lead in my foot, and I get tickets, and, everyday things. People get parking tickets, traffic tickets, speeding tickets. Now, will that hurt someone, given they paid the fine, they did what they're supposed to do, will that hurt someone in their process?
Generally, no. No. If it's a traffic infraction or something like that, it's not considered a crime. So anything from speeding or parking tickets or anything along those lines shouldn't be an issue at all. They're mostly infractions, okay? So there's got to be either a misdemeanor or a felony to get you in trouble. And surprisingly, even a DUI, for the most part, won't get you into too much trouble.
Now, what about the licensing? That's been a big controversy in California and other states. We're now licensing people. So people that priorly have been convicted of driving without a license, will that hurt them, or can they expunge it, or how does that work?
Well, it shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't stop them from getting a driver's license. So California recently passed legislation to allow people that are undocumented or here without permission to get a driver's license. Now, that's not going to go into effect until about a year from now, up to maybe January of 2014, but the Department of Motor Vehicles expects to be able to start processing these in about September or October of next year. A conviction like that shouldn't prevent you from getting a driver's license, but it's certainly something that you want to stay on top of. I have found that most of my clients, when they get in trouble with immigration, they put themselves in that position by driving without permission, putting themselves in a position where they might get arrested. And then there would be something called an ICE hold, where immigration won't allow the local authorities to release them from custody.
Now, as a U.S. citizen, I have the right to expunge my record.
Yes.
If I did something wrong, if I was young and crazy, someone who's here undocumented, who has a record, a misdemeanor or what have you, are they allowed the same right to expunge as well?
They are, yeah. The criminal process for expungement, it doesn't take into consideration your legal status whatsoever. In fact, for the most part, local courts don't ever consider whether or not you have legal status. That's entirely a federal issue. So local state courts generally don't ask.
Okay, so if someone has, maybe when they got here, maybe they got a DUI or two or a couple incidents, can they expunge their record and then apply for citizenship or permanent resident card?
Yes, they can expunge their record. They can expunge their record, although it's now federal law is different. Now, they don't always consider it an expungement. For some crimes, you can get it expunged, but immigration will still consider it a conviction for their purposes. It's something that you would probably want to talk to an attorney about. If you have anything on your record that you're concerned needs to be expunged, I think it's a good idea to talk to an attorney to see if it's really an issue, because sometimes it's not. There's a petty offense exception, so if you have one conviction that's not that big of a deal, the immigration officials will overlook it. But it's something that you definitely want to have someone else look at. If there's any kind of a criminal background, it's a really good idea to tread lightly because the consequences can be pretty bad, even for something that seems like maybe it's not that bad of a criminal conviction.
Now, for people that were brought here as children, have grown up, gone to our schools, and they didn't realize that they didn't have document status. What rights do they have? Because I know the DREAM Act happened and a lot of people applied for it, but what happened after that?
So what a lot of people are calling the Dreamers and the DREAM Act, so what we're talking about is, like you said, it's undocumented immigrants who came while they were children, okay? Now, they did not pass the DREAM Act. They're still talking about passing the DREAM Act. What they did, because the legislature didn't actually pass anything, but our executive branch, President Obama, issued a directive to immigration calling for deferred action for childhood arrivals. They call it DACA, right?
DACA, okay.
And so now there's a process within immigration for people who came here before they were 16, who either graduated high school or they're still working on it, who haven't had any major convictions, where they can get a 2-year renewable period where they won't be removed or deported just for being here unlawfully, and they can get the right to work. So they actually have an employment authorization card, and they can get a driver's license. And they don't have to wait for this California legislation. They can get their driver's license right away.
Nice, very good. Okay, we'll be back with Jack in just a few minutes.
Dad, Katy Perry is coming to town. Can we get tickets, please?
Tickets? Sure, how many?
Well, there's Hannah and Maddie and Jen and Sarah and Sir
Whoa,
Bees.
hold on. Here it comes. We can't forget about your older sister.
Thank you.
Seriously? What? I get 2 times the thank you points on each ticket. Can I come? Yep.
The Citi Thank You Preferred Card. Now earn 2 times the points on entertainment and dining out with no annual fee. To apply, go to Citi.com/thankyoucards.
Be all over TV and YouTube now, Jack.
Oh, God, damn.
Hi, welcome back. We're here at BG's Cafe in downtown Oxnard, and we're here with Table Talk. And if you want more information on this show or about any information Jack discussed today, like I said, you can go to Facebook/Table Talk 805 or email me directly at tabletalk805@gmail.com. Now, Jack, what happens if I'm detained and I shouldn't be? Are there waivers or processes to get me out? Because I obviously can't bail out. So what would I do?
Well, it's actually a more complicated answer than you probably would have expected, but sometimes you can bail out. If you're detained by immigration, once you're in immigration's custody, there's a couple of different ways that'll go. If you don't have anything really concerning on your criminal background, there's a good chance that they'll release you on your own recognizance or your own promise to appear when they give you a court date. Now, that's the best possible solution. Number 2 is they might not do that, and they might hold you over, and then a judge will determine whether or not you can post bail. There's also a category, though, called mandatory detention. So if you fit in that category, unfortunately, you can't get bail, and you'll have to be in immigration's custody until you're done with your proceedings.
Now, when someone's in custody, can they call you and say, look, I'm down here, what do I do, what happens?
Yes, yeah. It's generally treated just like an American citizen in jail. So you do have access to telephones. It's still somewhat limited, just like it is in jail. But yeah, you can get access out, and they can still receive mail coming in. The immigration office here in Ventura County is in Camarillo, and they're pretty good about allowing attorneys to talk to their clients and having the clients be able to contact someone to let them know where they are and what their situation is.
Now, what happens if someone's detained and they have small children? What happens to those children?
Well, sometimes children can also be put in removal proceedings. And it depends, because most of the time, immigration doesn't get involved with the children. So it's up to the family to decide what's the best thing to do for the kids. A very common situation is that parents might come into the United States without permission, and they might have children born here. In that case, the kids are U.S. citizens, right? So they can't be deported. Now, they're free to go back to, most of the time, Mexico, if that's what the parents want, but our authorities can't force that. So a lot of times it's a matter of finding family members or someone that they trust here in the United States to take care of the children. And other times they don't have those kind of options, so the children go back to the country of origin with their parents.
Now, where do they go during the time that mom and dad are in federal custody? Because how long does it take once you're picked up by immigration and you go to court? Is it a speedy process? Is it a long process?
So the process can be very long. The process can take a couple of years sometimes. If you're in custody, if you can't get a bond, it's going to go pretty quick because they don't want to hold you in there for a long time. So usually it'll wrap up within about 4 months if you're in custody. But if we can get you out and you're on bail or you're out on your own recognizance, then generally you can take care of your kids while we're going through the whole court process because it's a long process.
Now, do they allow people to wrap up their affairs, if you will, before they're deported out, or you're in
A
there?
lot of times they will, you know, and that's something that we ask for regularly because when we go to these proceedings, we're planning on winning. Now, every once in a while we can't do that. But we will a lot of times ask for the court's permission to give our clients some time to set their affairs in order because a lot of times our clients have been living here a long time. They have homes and families and property that they need to figure out what to do with before they can leave. And the government is generally pretty good about giving us that kind of time.
Now, if someone here owns a home and owns property or maybe even has a business, but they don't have documentation, will they still deport them? I mean, they've obviously vested in our country.
Well, maybe. Now, that is a factor that the judges will take into consideration, right? They're going to look at all these kind of things. If someone's in removal proceedings, the judge is going to consider how long they've been here, how assimilated they are, basically, how much family they have in the United States that's here legally, what they've done with their education. If they've started a business, basically, what have they done with the time that they're here, if they're eligible for cancellation of removal, which is the best source of fighting deportation. But the judge will take into consideration a broad spectrum of considerations, and the ones that you listed are very important. It just makes sense because generally what the judge is looking at is the fact that this person has disrespected our immigration laws and sometimes other criminal laws as well. Does that outweigh the good that this person does in our country, either for their relatives or for the community at large?
Now, what other kind of waivers can people get while they're kind of in the limbo process?
Well, the most common in the limbo process, you mean like waiting for their...
Kind of either waiting or kind of in the shadows still or still in that...
Lots of different kind of waivers. Now, waivers, what that means is you're asking for an exception to a rule, okay? The most common waiver that is needed is a 601 waiver for unlawful presence. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but unlawful presence is when you've either overstayed a visa, like for example a tourist visa, or if you never had permission to be here. Now, if that happens and you're over 18, you accumulate unlawful presence. And if you've been in the country with at least a year of unlawful presence, the law says that before you can adjust and get your paperwork, you've got to spend 10 years outside the country. The 601 is an application to waive or get a waiver for that rule, right? And the way you do that is you've got to show that if the United States government enforces that rule on you, and you have to stay in Mexico most of the time for those 10 years, that your relatives in the United States are going to suffer extreme and unusual hardship. So we're talking about your spouse or your parents most of the time, and you've got to show that if you're forced to be gone for 10 years, that your relatives are really going to suffer. So they're not only penalizing the intending immigrant, they're penalizing other people like citizens and lawful permanent residents in the United States.
Now, a lot of people think of immigration and they predominantly think of Hispanic people. But Asian population seems to have a large immigration problem too. The Asian and Eastern European, Russian, Ukrainian. Now, how do they process them? Is it a little different than the Hispanics, considering Mexico is just next door, or how do
Sort of. And especially in our area, you know, most of our immigrant population is Latino. But we are a nation of immigrants, and we have immigrants from all over the world. Now, generally, the law treats all immigrants the same. We don't have different rules for Chinese people versus Mexican people versus Ukrainian people. But in reality, they usually face different problems, okay? Usually, if you're from Asia, you probably came here on some kind of a visa because it's hard to kind of swim across the Pacific, right?
It takes a little while,
Yeah, so usually you've entered the country with permission, but you'll still have a lot of other problems, you know, like family unity, okay? Because it could be that, especially from the Philippines, okay, long ways from the Philippines, they actually have to wait longer for their relatives to come here than people from Mexico. And a lot of times, you'll have a person who is petitioned for by their parents, and they have to wait like 20 years to come. And then they finally get their paperwork straightened out and they can come, but now their children are too old and they've aged out. And so we have this problem where you're constantly trying to reunite your family because the backlog is so long for immigration visas that it's just really, really hard to get everything together. That's a problem that we face all the time.
Now, I read in the paper, I believe it was in the LA Times, a few years back, a shipping container full of Asian immigrants. It was various ones. They snuck them in, and I guess that's how they sneak in. They come in shipping containers, embargoes on boats, all kinds of ways. Now, what happens to them? Because you can't easily return them.
Yeah.
And they're, what kind of protection do they get, considering they traveled an ocean to get over?
Unfortunately, probably not a lot. Now, there is something called asylum. Okay, now if they left a dangerous place, then they can apply for asylum. So basically, asylum is a provision within our law where we won't return someone to a country if they would be in a bad position over there, if they'd be in danger, if they'd be persecuted for their involvement within a particular social group, right? So, for example, this happens a lot, or it did happen a lot with Cubans. So if you didn't agree with Fidel Castro's government and you snuck your way over here, if you got on some kind of a raft and made your way over to the United States, you can apply for asylum. And generally, if it looks pretty clear that you'd be in danger in your home country, we'll allow you to stay here. Now, so in that position, right, where these people came and they just arrived here, maybe they left a very bad situation, they can apply for asylum. Outside of that, there's probably not a lot of relief for those people, unfortunately.
Now, what about countries that have gone through turmoil? Let's say Guatemala. For a long time, it was a giant genocide going on. People fled. They came over for asylum. Now, obviously, things have changed. A little more diplomatic. They're not trying to kill each other. When that happens, when the wars are over or the times have turned, so let's say 20 years later, can they go back? Can they go back home? Can they go back and see what happened?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. You're not stuck here if you're granted asylum. Absolutely not. And that's very much what happens most of the time, right? Usually if there's some kind of a political strife or some kind of a major problem, with time it gets better. We may see that Cuban government, it already seems like there's a lot of change there, right? We have a lot of Cuban nationals who are given asylum or refugee status here. And they may want to go back to Cuba. They either might want to go back to reconnect with their family members or something along those lines. And that's something that is definitely available to them.
Now, if they're given asylum and then 20, 30 years later they're able to return back to their country, are they able to come back? Because obviously they've now made roots here. They've obviously bought homes or gone to school, got jobs. Can they go back and forth? Did they reapply? How would that work?
Generally, yes. They can go back. There's a couple different mechanisms. One thing that you reminded me of that I wanted to talk about that has to do with this very subject is advanced parole. So you can actually get permission, even though you're not a lawful permanent resident in the United States, you can get permission from the United States to leave and come back.
Okay.
Even if you don't have permission to be here. Now this is especially useful for deferred action, which we talked about before with DACA. Because once you have deferred action, you can ask the government for advanced parole. For example, okay? So say you came here as a child from Mexico, and you are granted deferred action. Now you still don't have legal status, but you can ask the government for permission to go, say, for example, to Mexico. Say, for example, like your family member is sick and they're not likely going to live. Perhaps the government will give you permission to go there and then come right back. Interestingly, right now, the law says that they will count it as an admission to the United States, which has tremendous benefits for you. Where later on, if someone petitions for you, like if you get married to a citizen and they petition for you, then you can adjust status here in the United States and avoid consular processing, avoid the need for the 601 waiver that we were talking about previously. In general, if you can avoid having to get a waiver, it's a good idea, because waivers are hard to get. It's a very high standard.
Now, what's the best way to reach you, Jack? To set an appointment at your office? Do you do a free clinic somewhere? What's a good way to talk to you? Because most people are reluctant because of preset dispositions they have from wherever they come from. What's a good way to talk to you?
The best way to talk to me is just to set an appointment to come in and talk to me in my office. We're in Ventura. We're right by the government center. And again, it's a free consultation. If we need to, we can also do a telephone consultation if they're out of the area or if they can't make it down to the office.
Now, being you don't speak Spanish, how would they communicate with you?
We have a fully bilingual staff, and all of my paralegals speak Spanish, and so we can go ahead and we can translate. Now, only Spanish though. We don't speak a whole lot of other languages, but
Now, do you have resources for the mestizo people, for the indigenous people?
we do. We have a translator that can come into our office. We don't have any staff that speak Mexico, but we can definitely bring in a translator.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, we can do that too.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank Jack Seal and the Bromund Law Group for being here. You can find Jack at the Bromund Law Group in Ventura on
It's County Square Drive.
County Square Drive,
950
Ventura.
County Square Drive, Suite 111, or you can call us at 805-650-1100.
They're right near the courthouse. You can take the bus there. So there is access to their office. And if you'd like more information on how to reach Jack or more information on this show, you can email me at tabletalk805@gmail.com, or you can go to Facebook at Facebook/tabletalk805. And next week we're going to have Susan Wilson, who's an attorney who will help you on self-help legal services on how to prepare your own documentations for very simple legal things, filing your own civil lawsuits, very basic things. And she'll let you know if you need to go to the attorney to get the help. So we'll look forward to you next week.